I knew the moment I crossed that line, there'd be no going back. And yet, when he looked at me like that, I didn't want to. My name is Celia. I'm 55 years old, and until last year, I lived a life that most people would call respectable, predictable even. I was a licensed psychotherapist with a quiet practice in Portland, Oregon. I'd built a reputation over 3 decades for being calm, rational, balanced, the kind of woman who always knew what to say and how to say it. The woman you go to when your world falls apart. The irony is, I never saw my own world crumbling until it was already dust. I guess it started on a Tuesday, which is almost funny in that mundane, utterly ordinary way that life sometimes throws the extraordinary at you when you're just going about your routine. I remember that morning so clearly. It was drizzling, like it always does in October here. The smell of wet leaves clung to my coat. I'd just finished with a couple I'd been seeing for months. Another session where no one wanted to talk about the actual elephant in the room. I was tired. Not just end of the day tired, soul tired. He came in early. His name was Jason Walsh, 29 years old, ex-military, working in tech now. Tall, but not imposing. There was something reserved about him, something wound tightly beneath the surface. I remember he didn't smile when I greeted him, not out of rudeness, just he didn't know how. He sat in the chair across from mine, legs wide, arms folded, chin lowered, like he was still bracing for some invisible threat. He'd been referred to me for PTSD-related symptoms, anxiety, and what the intake form described as difficulty maintaining emotional boundaries. The irony of that would slap me in the face much, much later. Our first session was quiet. He didn't say much, mostly shrugged. His voice was low and measured, but his eyes, blue, sharp, almost painfully observant, never looked away from mine. That kind of unblinking presence you don't usually get from someone in therapy. Especially not a man. Especially not on day one. I remember thinking, he's dangerous. Not in a physical sense. I didn't feel unsafe. I just recognized something in him. The way you recognize your own shadow on someone else's wall. Something deeply broken and familiar. You see, no one ever tells you this, but therapists, we're often drawn to pain because we're trying to understand our own. We want to fix others because it gives us the illusion that we're not still bleeding ourselves. At that point in my life, I had been divorced for 9 years. My daughter, Julia, had moved to Boston and started a life of her own. I had my work, my house, my tea in the evenings. I was alone, yes, but not lonely. At least, that's what I told myself. Jason started coming weekly, then twice a week. He was smart, that much was clear. But it wasn't just intelligence. It was the way he watched people, like he was dissecting their words in real time. I started noticing that he did it to me too. I'd ask a question, and he'd pause a moment too long before answering, like he was weighing not just what to say, but what I wanted to hear. Most clients don't do that, and most clients don't make me feel seen. Not like that. One night, and I hate how vivid this memory is, I was in the kitchen reheating some lentil soup. I'd left the office late after his session, and I couldn't stop thinking about how he'd looked at me when he left. Just a glance, barely more than a second, but it lingered, like heat in a room after someone walks out. I told myself I was just projecting. It happens. We call it transference. It's textbook. The patient imposes feelings, admiration, affection, longing, onto the therapist. It's normal. It's manageable. But what happens when it's not just transference? What happens when it starts to go both ways? The first time I felt it, really felt it, was session 7. I remember because I wrote about it in my notes and immediately deleted the entry. He had been talking about a deployment in Afghanistan, about a time he'd had to choose between following orders and protecting a civilian child. He choked up a little, not dramatically, just this quick flicker in his voice, and then silence. I did what I always do. I leaned in, gently, asked if he wanted to keep going or take a break. And then he said, quietly, "You have kind eyes. You don't flinch when I say things." It was a compliment, innocent enough, but I felt it slide under my skin like a needle. That night, I didn't sleep well. I began to anticipate his sessions more than I should have. I started dressing more intentionally on the days he came in. Softer colors, a little lip tint. Nothing inappropriate, nothing overt. But I noticed myself in the mirror in ways I hadn't in years. He asked questions, too, about me, subtle ones, about whether I always knew I wanted to be a therapist, about what I did outside of work, about whether I believed people could ever really be seen. It was the kind of attention I hadn't felt in a long, long time, and I soaked it up like parched earth. Still, I told myself it was fine. He was a patient. I was a professional. This wasn't personal. I was in control. I kept telling myself that even when he started showing up 5 minutes early and leaving 5 minutes late, even when he said things like, "You're the only one who makes me feel real," even when my breath caught in my throat one afternoon because our hands brushed and neither of us moved away right away, even when, after one session, I locked the door behind him and leaned my forehead against the wood and whispered, "What the hell are you doing, Celia?" But the truth was, I already knew. I was slipping, and part of me didn't want to stop. There's this moment, when you start crossing a line you swore you'd never cross, that feels like floating, not flying, not falling, just suspended. Like your body knows what's happening, but your mind hasn't caught up yet. You tell yourself it's curiosity, harmless, temporary, a passing moment that doesn't mean anything if you don't name it out loud. But I knew somewhere deep in the quiet part of my gut that something had shifted between Jason and me. And I didn't want to admit it because once I did, I'd have to face what it meant. That I was in danger of becoming the thing I had always warned others about. I started noticing things I shouldn't have noticed, like how he always wore black or dark gray, but his shirts were always soft, well worn, fitted just enough to show the definition in his arms. I noticed the way his voice dipped slightly when he talked about guilt, and the way he sometimes clenched his jaw when he laughed, like joy was foreign to him, and he didn't trust it. More than anything, I noticed how present he was, with me, always. He remembered things I'd said in passing, that I liked chamomile tea, that I volunteered once a month at the women's shelter, that I used to play piano but stopped after the divorce. No client had ever mirrored me so quietly, so seamlessly, and I found myself offering too much in return, letting sessions go 10, 12 minutes over, letting silences hang longer than they should. It came to a head on a Wednesday evening. I remember because the sky was this haunting pale pink outside the window, and the office had this dim glow from the corner lamp I always kept on. Jason was talking about the first time he saw someone die. Not in battle, not on deployment, but at home. His mother when he was 16, breast cancer, no pain meds, no dignity, just anger and helplessness. And I reached out. It wasn't even conscious. He had stopped speaking and looked at the floor. Something in me moved before I could stop it. I touched his hand, just for a second, just enough. He looked up, startled, not at the gesture, but at the fact that I did it. And then he said, "I wish someone had touched me like that when she died." I pulled away, immediately. My face burned. My stomach flipped. I mumbled something clinical and cowardly, something about grounding and human connection. But I knew the truth. That was the first time I touched him, and it was not going to be the last. I spent that night pacing my kitchen, wine untouched, music off, heart in my throat. I considered terminating his treatment, referring him out to a colleague, shutting it all down before it spiraled. But then I imagined telling him that, imagined his reaction, and something inside me recoiled from the idea of losing that tether. I was ashamed, but I was also alive, and that scared me even more. The next session, he was different, quieter, more guarded, but not angry, almost like he was waiting to see what I'd do next, like he'd handed me a match and wanted to know if I'd strike it. And I did. Not all at once. It was a slow burn. I started offering evening slots that weren't technically available. I started meeting him after hours. Once, when the rain was coming down in sheets and he arrived soaked and trembling from the cold, I offered him tea and sat with him on the couch, not in my therapist chair, but beside him. Too close. I asked him questions I shouldn't have, about love, about need, about what he dreamed about when he was alone. And he answered. God help me. He answered in a voice so raw, so aching, it felt like being stripped bare. One night, after a particularly intense session, he stood by the door for a moment longer than usual. He looked at me, and not like a patient looks at a therapist. No, he looked at me like a man looks at a woman he's been undressing with his thoughts for months. And then he said, "Why are you afraid of yourself, Celia?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know anymore. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number, just one line. "I found the song you said you used to play, Debussy, Claire de Lune. I listened to it for hours last night." My hands trembled holding the phone. It was him. I hadn't given him my number, not directly, but I hadn't exactly protected it either. It was in the public therapist directory. I could have ignored it. I should have. Instead, I replied, "It's one of my favorites." And that was the beginning of something we couldn't take back. We started texting, late at night, usually. It wasn't explicitly romantic at first, just thoughts, snippets, music, memories. But it felt intimate in a way I couldn't justify. He told me about a nightmare he'd had, about a childhood memory of running through fields behind his grandmother's house. I told him about my first piano recital and how I froze when the curtain rose. He made me laugh. He made me feel. And then, one night, he sent a message that made my breath stop. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met somewhere else? If I wasn't your patient?" I didn't reply for a long time, but eventually I wrote back. All the time. And that was the moment everything changed. After that message, the air between us became something else entirely. It wasn't just a question anymore. It was a proposition. A door cracked open, and once it's open, you start to feel the draft. Subtle at first, then all-consuming. You can't pretend it's closed once you've looked through it. I knew I had two options: shut it, lock it, refer him out, walk away professionally and ethically intact, or keep walking. I told myself I'd wait, that I'd let things cool down. that I wouldn't respond to his next message, but when it came, soft, simple, "Good night, Celia," I couldn't help myself. "Good night, Jason." After that, we didn't stop. Our sessions became heavier with silence. Not the kind where people don't know what to say, but the kind where everything's already been said between the lines. Our words were careful, but our eyes were reckless. He stopped sitting in the chair across from me. He started taking the seat closer to the window, the one nearer to mine. I should have asked him to move back, reinforce the boundary, reclaim the space, but I didn't. Then came the night I broke. It was raining again. Portland never really stops weeping in November. The streetlights were smeared across my office window, glowing orange and wet. He arrived late. I should have sent him home, but I stayed. He walked in, soaked. His hoodie clinging to his shoulders. No umbrella, no jacket, just this wild, broken look in his eyes, like he had nowhere else to go. "I didn't know where else to be," he said, before I could even ask. And before I could think, before I could breathe, I stood up and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. My hands touched his neck, his jaw. His breath hitched. I should have stepped away. God knows I wanted to. Instead, I stayed. He looked at me, not with seduction, not with manipulation, but with something so devastatingly vulnerable, it nearly brought me to my knees. "I think about you," he whispered. "Too much. I know I shouldn't. I know this is wrong, but I do." I closed my eyes. "I do too," I said. Quiet, honest, bare, there. It was done. No taking it back. We stood there in silence for what felt like hours. And then, slowly, almost reverently, he leaned forward. Not forcefully, not hungrily, just asking. With his breath, with his body, with the stillness between us. When our lips finally met, it wasn't fireworks. It was something deeper, slower, like a door closing behind us and no key left. He kissed me like he'd been waiting his entire life to do it right, and I let him. My hand slid up his arms into his hair. His fingers grazed my waist, tentative and unsure, like he didn't believe I was real. The kiss deepened, and for one terrifying, exhilarating moment, I forgot everything. The years between us, the degrees on my wall, the oath I had taken to protect my patients from me. All of it disappeared under the weight of that kiss. When we pulled apart, I was breathless. Not just from him, but from what I'd just done. He looked at me, lips slightly parted, eyes searching. "Do you regret it?" I should have said yes. Instead, I said, "Ask me tomorrow." He didn't stay that night. I made sure of it. I ushered him out with shaking hands and a heart hammering in my chest so loudly I thought the whole building could hear it. When the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor and cried. Not because I didn't want it, but because I did. Because I knew that what had just happened was only the beginning. The next day, I canceled my morning clients, sat on the couch in my robe, staring out the window like some tragic figure in a story I never meant to write. I considered calling the licensing board, telling them what I'd done, preemptively turning myself in. But I didn't. Instead, I did what I always do, compartmentalized. I cleaned the kitchen. I folded laundry. I pretended everything was fine, until his name lit up on my phone. I can't stop thinking about last night. I didn't reply. Not right away, but eventually I did. Me neither. That weekend, I drove out to the coast, something I hadn't done in years. Just me, the sea, and the cold biting wind that seemed to echo the ache inside my ribs. I sat in the sand for hours, trying to figure out who I was now. A therapist? A woman? A hypocrite? All of the above? I replayed every moment of that kiss, the way his fingers had trembled against my skin, the way my body had betrayed my better judgment, the way I had let it happen. I thought about what it meant, about the ethics, about the fallout, about what would happen if I told my colleagues, my daughter, myself. I didn't come to any conclusions. I just sat with the truth that I wanted him, not in a reckless, impulsive way, but in a way that felt dangerous because it was tender, because it was real. That made it worse. When I returned to Portland, I told myself I would end it. I would refer him out. I would draw a line in the sand and never cross it again. I believed that, right up until I opened the door to my office Monday evening and saw him standing there, flowers in hand, a question in his eyes, and a tenderness that undid every wall I had tried to build. And just like that, the sand was gone. He stood in the doorway with those ridiculous daisies, simple, sweet, too bright for November, and I just stared at them, stunned. "I didn't know what else to do," Jason said quietly, but I didn't want to pretend it didn't happen. Neither did I, but I also didn't want to believe what it meant. I took the flowers, my fingers brushing his. They were damp, cold from the air outside, just like the night he first kissed me. "Come in," I said, even though everything in me knew I shouldn't. He did, and I crossed the line again. We didn't touch, not that night, not physically. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, hands in our laps, space thick between us, but the air was different. Every breath felt like permission. Every silence felt like a question. I told him the truth, the parts I was willing to say out loud, that I'd never done anything like this before, that this wasn't me, that I didn't know how to make sense of what I was feeling. He listened. And when I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw something so terrifying it made me feel like I was falling. I saw how much he wanted me. Not just my body, but my mind, my presence. The version of myself I only showed behind closed doors. We made a decision that night. One I knew was already a lie. "We stop here," I said. "No more sessions. I'll refer you out. We'll figure it out from there." He nodded. I wrote down the names of 2 colleagues I trusted, women I knew wouldn't ask too many questions. I gave him the paper. He took it, folded it once, slipped it into his pocket. Then he looked at me and said, "And what about us?" I had no answer, because what were we? A woman who broke her code, a man who found solace where he shouldn't have, a tangle of loneliness and craving, and something dangerously close to love. That weekend, we met for coffee, in public, as friends. I wore sunglasses and a coat that felt like a disguise. He smiled in a way that made my stomach tighten. We didn't talk about therapy. We talked about books, about music, about the little things that made us feel real. I laughed more in that hour than I had in months. When he walked me to my car, he leaned in and whispered, "You're different outside the office." "So are you," I said, barely able to meet his eyes. We didn't kiss, not yet, but the space between us crackled. The next week, we met again. And again, once at a bookstore, once on a trail in Forest Park where we walked for hours without speaking much. The third time was dinner, a quiet place in the Pearl District, tucked away behind glass and candlelight. That was the night it happened. That was the night I stopped pretending. I told him to follow me home. I don't remember the drive, just the thudding of my pulse, the way my fingers gripped the wheel too tight, the way I kept seeing red lights as stop signs I was ignoring. When we got inside, I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small lamp by the hallway. Warm, amber, dim. I stood there for a moment, keys still in hand, and he just looked at me, like he was waiting for me to set the rules. "I'm not your therapist anymore," I said. "I know, and this is real," he finished. "It feels real." And then he stepped closer. His hands were tentative at first, like he was afraid I'd vanish. But when I didn't pull away, when I tilted my chin up just slightly, he moved with certainty. He kissed me slowly. No rush, no demand, just reverence. It was the kind of kiss that felt like an answer to a question I didn't know I'd been asking my whole life. We moved to the couch, then the floor, then eventually to my bedroom. There are things I won't say here, not because they were obscene or unrepeatable, but because they were ours, sacred in a way I can't describe. He touched me like he was rediscovering something he'd lost. I responded like I'd been asleep for years. I didn't think about age, about ethics, about shame. I just felt, and it overwhelmed me. Afterwards, he stayed, fell asleep beside me, hand draped over my waist, breath warm against the back of my neck. I lay there, wide awake, staring into the dark, wondering what I had done. But also, and this is the part I hate to admit, I felt peaceful, like I was home. For weeks, we lived in a kind of suspended reality. We met in secret. My office was still my office, but it no longer contained his presence. That part of my life had spilled into my living room, my bedroom, my skin. He texted constantly, sometimes funny things, memes, inside jokes, bits of poetry he thought I'd like, sometimes raw confessions about his father, about the war, about the dreams he had that still woke him up sweating. I listened, always, but sometimes I responded like more than a listener, like a lover. And that's exactly what I had become. I started canceling plans, avoiding friends, lying to Julia when she called, pretending everything was fine, that I was just busy, tired, distracted. I stopped referring to myself as a therapist, even in my own head, because therapists don't do what I had done. And yet, I couldn't stop, couldn't let go. I kept telling myself it was temporary, a phase, a burst of misguided desire that would burn itself out. But then he said it. 3 words, over breakfast, still tangled in my sheets, his hair messy, his eyes half-lidded. "I love you." And I froze, because I knew whatever this was, it was no longer temporary. "I love you." He said it without hesitation, like it had been sitting behind his teeth for days, waiting for permission to be real. His voice was quiet but steady. He looked at me like there was nothing more obvious in the world, like loving me wasn't complicated, or risky, or wrong. And I said nothing. I just stared at him, toast growing cold in my hand, heart pounding so loud I couldn't even hear the rain outside, because he meant it. And I didn't know if I could say it back, not because I didn't feel something. God, I did. Every time he touched me, every time he said my name, I felt something wake up in me, something I thought was gone. But love is a word you don't get to throw around casually when you've crossed as many lines as I have. It carries too much weight, too much danger, too many consequences. He must have felt the shift in me because his face changed, softened, then tightened, like he was bracing for rejection. "You don't have to say it back," he said quickly, eyes darting. I needed you to know." I reached out, touched his cheek, kissed his forehead. "Jason, whatever this is between us, it's already more than I ever expected. I just don't know if I have the right to call it love." His jaw tensed. "Why not?" Because I was his therapist, because I had power over him once, because I should have protected him from the world, from himself, from me. Because I was 55 and he was 29, and this was never supposed to happen. Because it was a fire I had no business feeding. But I couldn't say any of that. Not then. Not without unraveling everything we built, however fragile and stolen it was. So instead, I just whispered, "Can we not talk right now?" And he nodded. He didn't press. He never did. That afternoon, after he left, I sat in the bath until the water went cold. I watched the steam curl off my skin and thought about the weight of that word, love. I thought about the way my name sounded in his mouth, the way my body responded to his like it had been waiting for his touch for years. I thought about how alive I felt and how terrified that made me. At work, I tried to act normal, took sessions, smiled, asked the same careful questions I always had. But something was off. I could feel it in the way I flinched when someone said his name. Jason was hardly uncommon, or how I hesitated before opening emails, half expecting to see a complaint or a warning, or worse. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed, and it was Naomi who did. Naomi's been my colleague for years, another therapist, a bit younger, but sharp as hell. She stopped by my office one morning with coffee and that look she gets when she smells blood in the water. "You okay?" she asked, handing me a paper cup. I nodded. "Just tired." She sat across from me, folded one leg over the other, and tilted her head. "You've been tired a lot lately." I looked down at the lid of the coffee. Avoidance. Classic deflection. She leaned in. "Celia, are you seeing someone?" The question hit me like a slap. I could have lied, should have, but I've known Naomi too long, and some part of me, the part that was fraying at the edges, needed to say it out loud. So I nodded. Just once. She didn't blink. "Who?" And I broke. I didn't say his name, but I said the truth, that he had been a client, that I ended the professional relationship, that we'd tried to walk away, but didn't, that I wasn't thinking like myself anymore, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Naomi was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Celia, you know this isn't just a line you crossed. This could end your career." "I know." "You could lose your license." "I know." She stared at me. "And you're still seeing him?" I swallowed. "Yes." She closed her eyes and exhaled, not in judgment, in grief. For me, for what she knew I was about to lose. Then she stood, came over, and hugged me. Tight, fierce, no words. After she left, I sat there for an hour, doing nothing, just sitting in the stillness of my own reckoning. Later that evening, Jason texted. He wanted to come over, said he'd bring wine. I told him no, that I needed space. He didn't argue. But that night, I missed him so much I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about his hands on my skin, the way he whispered things in the dark that no man had ever said to me with such care. Not just lust, not just need, but worship. The kind that feels holy, the kind that feels wrong because it feels holy. The next day, I told Naomi I was taking a leave of absence, just a few weeks, to recalibrate. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and hugged me again. I thought that would help, that stepping away from my practice would give me clarity. Instead, it gave me him. Jason started coming over during the day. Long walks, movies, cooking together. He was sweet, attentive, almost boyish in the way he tried to impress me. He read books I liked, tried recipes I mentioned in passing, even bought a secondhand piano and asked me to show him how to play. And I did. Our days together became small sanctuaries. We built a bubble, and for a while, it held. Until it didn't. The first crack came during a phone call with Julia, my daughter. She was asking how I was doing, if I'd thought about coming to visit her and her fiancé in Boston. I was distracted. Jason was in the kitchen making omelets, shirtless, humming some ridiculous pop song. "Mom," she said suddenly, "is there someone there?" I froze. There was a pause. Then, "Are you seeing someone?" My silence said everything. "Is it serious?" Another silence. "Oh my God, who is he?" I deflected, lied, said it was someone I met through mutual friends, said it wasn't serious, said I wasn't ready to talk about it. But I could feel her suspicion through the phone, and I knew that bubble we built, it was about to burst. Because secrets don't stay secret forever, especially not when you build a life on a lie. I thought I could manage it. The secret, a silence, the balancing act of two separate lives. Thought I could keep Julia away from the truth, keep Naomi from pressing further, keep Jason in his own little pocket of sunlight where nothing could rot or spoil. But the thing about secrets is, they rot you first. The call with Julia haunted me for days. I kept rehearsing answers I didn't give her, trying to imagine how she'd react if she knew the truth. That her 55-year-old mother was in bed, literally, with a man barely older than she was. A man who used to call me ma'am when we first met. It didn't help that Jason started getting comfortable, not in a bad way. He was gentle, still thoughtful, but he stopped asking if he should come over. He just came, let himself in with the key I gave him without thinking, started storing his toothbrush in my bathroom, started leaving books on my nightstand, a jacket on the back of my chair. Little pieces of him began to take root in my space, and I let them. One night, we sat on the floor of my living room, wine, vinyl playing, some old Joni Mitchell album I hadn't listened to in years. He was lying with his head in my lap, eyes half closed. I was running my fingers through his hair, soft and steady, and he said, "Do you ever think about the future?" My fingers paused. "What kind of future?" He looked up at me, smiling. "Ours." That word, ours, like it was obvious, like it was promised. I hesitated. "Jason, I don't know if we have a future, not a real one." He sat up, blinking slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't know how this ends, or if it's sustainable, or if I even deserve to want it to be." His face darkened. "You think I'm some phase, some escape?" "No," I said quickly. "No, it's not that. It's just, I don't want to ruin your life. You're still young. You could have anything. I want you." The way he said it, raw, angry, almost pleading, hit something deep in my chest. "I'm not trying to hurt you," I whispered. "I'm trying to protect you from me." He stood then, pacing, frustrated. "You keep talking like you're some kind of predator, like I didn't choose this. I'm not a child, Celia. I've seen things, survived things. If you think this, us, is the thing that's going to break me, then you don't know me at all." And in that moment, I realized something awful. He wasn't wrong, but that didn't mean I wasn't. Later that night, after he'd gone, slamming the door louder than usual, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The lines on my face, the thinning around my hairline, the small, tight ache behind my eyes that never really went away anymore. I looked older, not because of the years, but because of the weight of what I was carrying. I picked up my phone, typed out a message. "We need space, just for a while. Please don't come by tomorrow." Then I stared at it for 20 minutes, deleted it, rewrote it, finally hit send. No reply. I didn't expect one. The next morning, I stayed in bed. No patients to see, no one to talk to. The silence was suffocating. I didn't eat. I barely drank. Just lay there, curled up in a bathrobe that still smelled like his cologne. That night, I thought I saw his car outside. I peeked through the curtains like some paranoid neighbor, but it was someone else, just a stranger, just another reminder that the world keeps turning even when your heart's stuck in quicksand. 3 days passed. Then a knock. Not the doorbell, not a text, a knock. I opened the door, and there he was, Jason. He looked rough, eyes red, clothes rumpled, like he hadn't slept, hadn't shaved, hadn't cared. "I'm sorry," he said, before I could even speak. "For what?" "For pushing, for making this harder, for forgetting that you're scared too." I didn't say anything. He stepped forward. "You said we don't have a future. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is doomed from the start. But if I only get to have now with you, I'll take it." That was the moment I should have ended it. Closed the door, told him no. Instead, I pulled him inside. We didn't speak for a long time, just held each other, clinging like two people trying to memorize the way they felt before the world stepped in again. That night, we made love slowly, tenderly. No fire, no frenzy, just a quiet, aching rhythm that felt like goodbye, even though neither of us said the word. When we woke the next morning, I watched him sleep, his face soft, almost boyish in the morning light. And I thought, if this is a mistake, it's the most human one I've ever made. But that human mistake was about to become very public. Because later that afternoon, while I was doing laundry, my phone lit up with a message that made my blood turn to ice. From Julia. "Who is Jason Walsh?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding, and then the second message came. "I saw him on your Instagram. He's tagged in a photo from that hike in Forest Park. He looks young, too young. Are you serious?" My hands shook. I hadn't meant to post that photo. It had been a mistake, a story, not a post. A snapshot of our feet side by side on the trail. I thought I deleted it, but apparently I hadn't. And now my daughter, was asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth wasn't just messy, it was unforgivable. I stared at Julia's message for so long, the screen dimmed and locked. When I finally looked up, the laundry had stopped. The house was still, like it knew something had broken inside me. Who is Jason Walsh? That question echoed in my head over and over. My first instinct was denial. To make up something light, dismissive. A friend, a hiking group, someone else's boyfriend. Anything to avoid the truth. But then the second message came, and it cut deeper. "He looks young, too young. Are you serious?" That wasn't curiosity. That was accusation. And worse, it was concern. I opened my mouth to speak, but I was alone. So I closed it and texted back with shaking fingers. "Can we talk later tonight? I'll explain." Her reply was fast. That's not reassuring. I didn't know what to do. Jason was in the shower, humming some tune he always mangled the lyrics to. He didn't know yet. He didn't see the avalanche coming. And it was coming. Fast. I paced the hallway like a trapped animal. I should have deleted that photo. I should have never taken it. I should have never let this happen. But I had. Jason walked out a few minutes later, towel around his waist, damp curls dripping down his temples. "You okay?" I nodded. Too quickly. He noticed. He always noticed. "What happened?" I hesitated, then handed him the phone. Let him read the messages himself. He was quiet. Then he said, softly, "Do you want me to disappear?" My head snapped up. "What? If this is too much, if it's going to ruin things with your daughter, if I'm embarrassing you." "Jason, no." My voice cracked. "That's not what this is." He looked at me for a long time, unreadable. "Then what is it, Celia? because from where I'm standing, it looks like you care what everyone else thinks more than what this is between us." I stepped toward him. "That's not fair." He didn't move. "Isn't it? I'm scared." "I know. And I don't have a template for this. There's no handbook, no guidebook for how to tell your daughter that you're in love with a man almost her age." The words slipped out before I could stop it. Love. His eyes softened. "Say it again." I looked away. He stepped closer, gently took my hand. "Please." And I did. "I love you." I didn't even realize how much I meant it until it was out of my mouth. It felt terrifying and liberating and irreversible. He kissed me, not hungrily, not desperately, but like someone anchoring themselves to the only safe place left. But the safety didn't last long. That evening, I called Julia. She didn't wait for me to speak. "Tell me the truth." So I did. I told her everything. Well, not everything. I left out the therapy part. I said we met through a friend, that we got close unexpectedly, that we were trying to take it slowly, but it got real faster than I expected. I told her his age. I told her his name. And I told her I was in love. Silence on the line. Then she said, "You're serious?" "Yes." Another pause. "Mom, I don't know what to say. This isn't you. You've never done anything like this." "I know." "Is he using you?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Are you happy?" I closed my eyes. Yes. A long exhale from her side. "Okay." I wasn't prepared for that. "Okay?" "I don't get it. I really don't, but I can hear it in your voice. Something's different. You sound not just happy. You sound like you want to live again." Tears stung my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'm not saying I understand. I'm not even saying I approve. But he's not a married man. You're not cheating. You're allowed to make strange choices. And if it all falls apart, I'll still be here." That broke me, because for the first time in weeks, I felt seen by someone outside of us. After we hung up, I sat on the porch alone for a long time, watching the rain bead on the railing, letting it sink in. Jason came out, sat beside me, quiet. "How'd it go?" I nodded. "Better than I expected." "She's okay?" "Mostly confused." He chuckled. "I get that." I leaned my head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around me, and for a while, we didn't say anything. We didn't need to. But even with that moment of peace, I knew something else was brewing underneath. Because the truth I hadn't told Julia, the real truth, was the part I was most ashamed of. Jason had been my client. Even though I'd stopped treating him before anything physical happened, it was still unethical. It was still wrong by every professional code I'd sworn to follow. And if anyone found out, it would destroy everything I'd built. My reputation, my practice, my license. And that secret wasn't safe forever. Naomi knew something. She hadn't asked more, but she didn't need to. And worse, Jason had started telling people we were together. Friends, acquaintances, his gym buddy, a coworker. It was small talk, casual, but word spreads. We weren't invisible anymore. One night, while I was brushing my teeth, Jason came up behind me and hugged me from behind, pressing his cheek against mine. "What if we left?" I paused. "Left? Portland. Started over. New city, new place, just us." I laughed. "That's not how real life works." "Why not?" "Because I have a house, a career, a daughter, a life here." He was quiet for a beat, then said, "I don't want to be a secret forever." That hit me hard, because I didn't want that either. But I also didn't know how to bring us into the light without losing everything. The next morning, I checked my email. Buried between newsletters and appointment reminders was a message from the Oregon Board of Licensed Professional Counselors. Subject: Inquiry regarding former client relationship. I sat frozen. The message was vague. Just a request to schedule a call to discuss a confidential matter. No details. No accusations. But I knew. Someone had said something, and the walls were starting to close in. My stomach dropped as I reread the subject line: Inquiry regarding former client relationship. I didn't even need to open the body of the email to feel the blood drain from my face. The room swayed slightly. I blinked at the screen like I could unsee it, like if I closed the laptop fast enough, it might disappear. But it didn't. It stayed. Cold, polite, official. They were asking for a call to discuss a confidential matter concerning your professional conduct, and invited me to propose a date and time. That was it. No explanation, no detail. But I knew. God, I knew. Someone had reported me. Maybe it was a patient who noticed something. Maybe it was someone from the office who saw us together. Maybe Naomi had said something, even unintentionally. Or maybe, and this thought chilled me more than anything, it was Jason. Not because I thought he would do it maliciously, but because he might have shared something with someone he trusted. A detail, a timeline, a phrase like "when she was my therapist," spoken in the wrong company. And now, here we were. I couldn't breathe. I sat back on the couch, hands trembling, staring at nothing. I hadn't even told Jason yet. He was in the kitchen, making coffee, humming again, the same lazy, tuneless hum I'd grown to find comfort in. But now, even that sound made me feel sick, because I realized something, sitting there in that moment of cold terror. No matter how much I cared about him, he had cost me everything. And maybe that wasn't fair, but it was true. He walked into the room with 2 mugs, one for me, one for him. "You okay?" he asked, instantly reading my face. "You look pale." I didn't sugarcoat it. "I got an email from the licensing board." He froze. "What?" "They want to schedule a call." He set both mugs down, untouched. What does that mean? It means someone said something, or they heard something, or they suspect something. He blinked. About me? About us. He looked like he'd been slapped. Jesus. I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself. I knew this was a risk. I told myself it was worth it, but now it's real. This could end everything, Jason. Not just my practice, my license, my name. He came toward me slowly, like I was something fragile he didn't know how to touch anymore. "What do we do?" I shook my head. "I don't know." For the first time since we crossed the line, there was real silence between us. Not charged, not intimate, just empty, heavy, like gravity itself had thickened. He sat beside me and whispered, "Do you regret it?" And the question tore something open. Did I? I thought of all the mornings I'd woken up beside him, all the nights I'd felt something real in his arms, all the moments I'd seen myself through his eyes, not as old, not as broken, not as used up, but as desirable, alive, worthy. But I also thought about my career, about Naomi's worried face, about Julia's voice on the phone, about 30 years of being the woman who never lost control. And I whispered, "I don't know." His face fell. "You don't know?" "It's not about you," I said quickly. "It's about what I built, about who I thought I was." He stood, started pacing. "So what? You'd take it back?" "No, that's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Celia? That this was a mistake? That I was a mistake?" "No," my voice broke. "God, no." But it was too late. I saw it in his eyes, the doubt, the distance. He thought I was pulling away, that I was choosing my career over him. And maybe, in a way, I was. That night, We didn't sleep together, not in the physical sense, and not even in the same room. He stayed in the guest room. I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. The next morning, he was gone. No message. Just gone. The coffee pot was empty. His toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. His jacket, the one he always left on the back of my chair, was gone too. I sat in the silence and felt something cave in my chest. Then I wrote back to the licensing board, scheduled the call, set it for Thursday, 3 days away. I spent those 3 days in a daze. Didn't see anyone, didn't call Julia, didn't tell Naomi, just waited, like a woman on death row counting down the hours. When Thursday came, I dressed like I was going to court. Button-down blouse, dark pants, hair tied back, no makeup. At exactly 2 p.m., I logged into the video call. The faces on the screen were familiar. Colleagues I'd seen at conferences, board members I'd respected for years. They greeted me with formal smiles, polite words. Then they got to it. We received information that suggests you may have engaged in a personal or romantic relationship with a former client. We're giving you an opportunity to respond before proceeding further. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. I could have lied, could have said no, denied everything. Claimed misunderstanding, but I didn't. I told the truth. Not the full, messy, soul-bearing truth, but the truth in outline. That yes, I had developed feelings for a client after terminating the therapeutic relationship. That yes, we had begun a personal relationship afterward. That I had not resumed therapy with him. That I understood the breach of ethics and I accepted the consequences. They were quiet for a long time. Then one of them, a woman I used to admire, said gently, "Celia, we're not here to destroy you, but you know how serious this is." "I do," I said. "There will be an investigation. We may ask for records, documentation, referrals." "I understand. We'll be in touch." And just like that, the call ended, and I sat there, alone in a blouse that suddenly felt too tight, in a room that felt too bright, with a silence that screamed. It wasn't official yet, but I knew. My career was over. I got up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine at 2 in the afternoon, and stared out the window at the sky turning gray. And all I could think was he worth it? I didn't have an answer, because he wasn't here. He didn't call. Not that day, not the next, not even the one after. I kept waiting, kept looking at my phone like a fool, refreshing messages, checking to make sure I hadn't somehow missed something. But no, Jason was silent, gone, as if he'd been a dream I'd imagined into existence. A beautiful, complicated, devastating dream. Only the toothbrush-shaped empty spot in a bathroom drawer reminded me it had been real. That and the taste of him still haunting my pillow. I told myself he needed time, space, that maybe he was just as scared as I was, that maybe he was angry, hurt even, and I deserved that. I hadn't protected him, not when it mattered. I'd pulled him into something I couldn't sustain, then recoiled when the weight of it got too heavy. I had wanted to keep him and keep my life. And life doesn't work like that. The board hadn't contacted me again yet, but the silence wasn't comfort. It was dread, like standing in the eye of a storm. I knew what was coming. At best, a suspension. At worst, a permanent revocation of my license, my practice, my name. And all I could think about was how quiet my house was without him. I tried to call Julia. We talked for a few minutes, light topics, small talk. She asked how I was. I said, "Fine." She didn't press. Maybe she sensed something was unraveling. Or maybe she was letting me keep the illusion for just a little longer. That weekend I drove. No destination, just miles. The trees were turning, red, gold, burnt orange, like the world had decided to wear fire before winter. I rolled down the window, let the wind tangle my hair. I thought of all the mornings Jason and I had spent in bed, legs intertwined, laughing over how I refused to let him drink coffee before brushing his teeth. I thought of his breath on my shoulder, his voice in the dark, his eyes when he said, "Say it again, I love you." Had I meant it? Yes. Was it enough? I didn't know anymore. I ended up at the coast, that same cold beach I'd visited months earlier when I first realized I couldn't stay away from him. The wind was stronger now, the ocean rougher. I stood barefoot in the sand, my coat flapping behind me like something trying to leave. And I cried, not quietly, not pretty. I cried the way grief demands, open, guttural, ugly, for what I'd done, for what I'd lost, for what I knew I could never get back. Not just Jason, but myself, the woman I used to be, the one who had rules, structure, safety. She was gone now, and all that was left was this, a woman stripped bare by a love she never expected and a truth she couldn't escape. When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox, not from the board, from Jason. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but when I opened it, my breath caught. It was short, handwritten, on plain paper. "Celia, I didn't know how to say this to your face, so I'm writing it instead. Maybe that's cowardly, or maybe it's the only way I can be honest. I never meant to hurt you, and I know that's exactly what I did. You were the first person who made me feel like I wasn't broken, like I could be seen and still loved. You changed the way I breathe, and I don't regret a second of what we shared. But I need to figure out who I am without needing you to tell me. I went from depending on war to depending on silence to depending on you. That's not fair to either of us. I love you, still, maybe always, but I think we need to stop before we both become something we don't recognize." I read it 3 times, the first with shock, the second with rage, the third with heartbreak, because I knew, even in his absence, even in his goodbye, he was still protecting me. He didn't mention therapy, or timelines, or anything that could be used against me. He was cleaning up the mess I'd left behind, and maybe that was love too. Not the fairy tale kind, not the forever kind, but the real kind, the kind that lets go when holding on would burn us both to ash. I sat on the floor, letter clutched to my chest, and whispered his name like a prayer. Then I called Naomi. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't lecture or scold. She just listened. And when I was done, when I finally admitted out loud everything, the sessions, the boundary crossed, the consequences, she said, "Okay, then let's clean this up." Can I clean it up? You won't leave this untouched, but you can survive it, even without him? Naomi was quiet. Then she said, "Maybe especially without him." That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I sat at the piano. My fingers hovered over the keys like old friends. They trembled at first, then they settled, and slowly, haltingly, I began to play. Claire de Lune, Jason's favorite. The notes spilled out soft and sad, full of everything I hadn't said, and I let the music hold me, steady me, remind me that I still existed beyond him, that I was still Celia, flawed, fractured, but alive, and maybe that was enough, for now. They tell you, when you're training to be a therapist, that every boundary matters, that the moment you start slipping, a personal story here, a touch there, a meeting that runs a little too long, you're already in danger. That transference, counter-transference, emotional projection, they're not just clinical terms, they're landmines. And if you forget where you're standing, you'll lose not just your credibility, but something deeper, your clarity. But what they don't tell you is how human it all becomes when it's you. When the person sitting across from you isn't just a client anymore, but someone who looks at you like you matter, who remembers things you don't think anyone notices, who sees you not as a provider of insight or authority, but as a woman who hasn't been really seen in years. Jason saw me, and maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. After the letter, after Naomi, after the piano, the days stretched out in a kind of suspended silence, the kind you only get after a storm has passed, but before the damage is counted. I didn't hear from the board for 2 more weeks. In those days, I lived in slow motion. I didn't see patients, didn't reopen the practice. I sent a simple message to my mailing list. The office is closed for an indefinite period. I thank you for your trust and understanding. No explanations. No promises. I went back to being just Celia, the woman who drank tea alone, the woman who took long walks in her neighborhood, wondering who she was now that she wasn't anyone's therapist or anyone's lover. Some mornings, I still checked my phone, a reflex I hadn't outgrown. Some nights, I lay in bed and caught phantom whiffs of Jason's skin on the pillow beside me. But slowly, painfully, but surely, the ache became less sharp. Not gone, not forgotten, just dulled at the edges. And then, one gray Thursday morning, the letter arrived. From the board, a formal ruling. Suspension, 1 year. Conditional. With reinstatement possible upon completion of ethics review, supervisory sessions, and professional rehabilitation. No public announcement. A sealed finding. Not disbarred, not destroyed. Just paused. When I read the words, my first feeling wasn't relief. It was shame. Because even though I had been spared, I knew I hadn't been innocent, and still, I was grateful. It meant I had a chance, not to go back to what I was. That woman was gone. But to become something else, something that still held meaning. That evening, I played the piano again. Something light this time, something that didn't ache. I opened the windows, let the fall air inside. I let myself imagine the possibility that maybe, someday, I could sit across from someone again and offer them something true and clean and whole, that maybe I hadn't ruined everything beyond repair. 2 days later, I got another letter, handwritten, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. Jason. My hands shook as I opened it. Celia, I hope you're okay. I don't know what the board decided. You never told me. I understand why. Maybe you didn't want me to carry that with me. Or maybe you were protecting yourself this time. Either way, I've thought about you every day. I'm in Arizona now, Tucson. Desert and light and heat like I never knew I needed. I took a job doing security work for a veterans center. It's quiet, and it gives me space to feel useful again. Real. I started therapy again with someone new, someone neutral, and I told her everything about you, about us. She didn't judge. She asked me what I wanted to learn from it all, and I said this, that love can be messy and still be real, that mistakes don't cancel meaning. I don't know if I'll ever stop loving you, but I know I need to learn who I am when I'm not holding on to someone else. You once told me that surviving is different than healing. I'm starting to understand what you meant. I hope you're playing piano again. And I hope, when you think of me, it doesn't hurt as much anymore. Yours, Jason. I cried when I finished reading it, but not the way I cried before. It wasn't despair. It was gratitude. because in his absence, he had given me something I hadn't known I needed: closure. And something even rarer: forgiveness. Not the kind you beg for, but the kind someone offers freely, like a blessing. A few weeks later, Julia came to visit. She brought her fiancé, Thomas. We drank wine, made risotto, laughed about her childhood piano recitals. She didn't ask about Jason. I didn't bring him up. But when she hugged me goodbye, she held on a little longer than usual. And I knew she knew, not everything, but enough, that I had lived something complicated, that I had come out the other side, that I was still her mother. The next spring, I applied to a program for senior clinicians in ethics and trauma-informed practice. I didn't know if they'd take me, but they did. I think they saw what was left in me: not perfection, but truth, and the ability to sit with people in their darkest places, not from above, but beside them. One day, I'll return to practice, and when I do, I'll carry Jason with me, not as a secret, not as shame, but as the reminder that even the most careful hearts are still human. That love, even the wrong kind, leaves its mark. That no matter how far you fall, there's still music to be played, still people to help, still a life to be lived. And as I sit now, on this quiet Sunday afternoon, the windows open, the light golden and soft on my floor, I can finally say it without flinching: I loved him, and I let him go. And somehow, both of those things made me whole.